just understand this. The predictable part about building a building company is that nothing is predictable. How old are you going to be before you start to experience life like you want it? I want to tell you right now, whether you like it or not, there is a better way to do business. Hi everyone, welcome to the Business for Builders podcast. Welcome to you if you're in YouTube land. My name's Max. I'm the CEO of Smith & Sons Remodeling Experts Canada. And as usual, like and subscribe. If you know someone who would enjoy this content or benefit from it, please be sure to share that. You can contact me directly at max@businessforbuilders.ca. And look, I'll get back to you as promptly as I can, depending on what your questions might be or whatever. Look, today in this episode, we're going to, it's a little bit different maybe, but not real different at the same time. We've obviously got, I don't know if you're familiar with TikTok. We've got a Business for Builders TikTok channel going, and it's a very different platform. And what we've done is we've actually got, I've got one of our audience members has actually posed a bunch of questions, and I don't mind, I enjoy sort of conversing on the platform with our audience members. But this one fellow had a bunch of questions. So I said, you know what, chum, I'm going to actually I'm actually going to answer all of your questions on a podcast. So here we are. So it sounds like, obviously we're based out of British Columbia. This fella he did say he was from Western Canada, so I don't know whether that is in BC with us here or elsewhere. But I'm not even sure how long he's been in and around the building and construction game. So, some of these questions, and look, a lot of the motivation for us at Business for Builders was that, we wanted to bring value to those that are in the construction sector. Of course, a lot of that demographic may not be on TikTok. And so, what we were trying to do is bring value to the young guys coming through. I mean, I finished my apprenticeship when I was 22, which is 1993, which makes me 49, just to save you the mathematics. And so, we don't want to bring to, the TikTok platform, certain information that might be just for maybe the older operators who are more veterans or have been around the game for a while. We actually wanted to cater to the young guys coming through. And, I don't actually know what this guy's name is, but I appreciate the amount of attention that he gave us. And I certainly wanted to bring value. So, there might be guys and gals who are listening or watching this video or audio right now who kind of know the answers to some or all of these questions. But for that, for that individual, I want to refer him to the podcast where we can sort of begin the education process. And if he's, early 20s or mid 20s and asking these kinds of questions, hopefully we can clarify, some of these issues and some of these subjects to ensure that he maybe has a better run. And I'd like to think that, that we have a lot of our viewers in TikTok can actually stand on the shoulders of us older guys and girls and really make something of their life and build a career and really run a high-performance building company. That's essentially what we want. So, look, let's start. I got 9 questions. Some of this relates to business, particularly in the sales, estimating, and quoting. And then there's one question at the back end here, which is more construction related. And I hesitate to get involved in teaching about construction, methodologies because, all of us come, particularly me, I never saw snow until about 7 years ago when I first came here. So, about snow loads was something that I never, ever, ever had to consider coming from, tropical Queensland. And so, I've had to go through a bit of a learning phase. Certainly too, with the cold, I never knew what a basement was. I saw it on movies, but never ever understood, how and why and what were the requirements around in the building codes, especially. So I've done a little bit I was very inquisitive as to how it rolled, and actually worked on the tools here in Canada for about 3 or 4 weeks. And I think we did 4 basements in 3 weeks. So that was a pretty intense learning curve for me, figuring out who's who in the zoo. So, so we're just going to cover off. And this is some stuff that I've covered before. You might find it fairly, fairly straightforward, and you might already understand a lot of it. But then there might be some of our audience members that will benefit from it as well. So first question was, what's the best way to build a spec home? Well, look, I think the challenge straight out the gate with a spec home is you're going to need money. You really want to have somewhere where you can draw from that. if you are borrowing the whole amount for a spec home, you find yourself heavily leveraged, which means your ability to borrow depends on how good your equity is and your credit rating and things like that. And then the holding cost for that spec home loan as you pull it down, you just got to be careful that the fees and charges and all the costs associated with building that spec home aren't really going to flood your ability to make a profit. I think for instance, what I'll do is I'll make mention a lot about the guy that I did my apprenticeship, and his name is Phil, and he is still in operation today. But when I started my apprenticeship with Phil, he had just come off the back of building bridges at the Sanctuary Cove golf course. So if you're in, Eastern Australia, more specifically sort of in and around the northern part of New South Wales or Queensland, you'll know what Sanctuary Cove is. It's a pretty highfalutin golf course on the Gold Coast. And so I watched Phil develop his business off the back of doing spec homes in conjunction with a real estate agent on the Gold Coast. And that's where I spent a lot of my early days, driving to and from the Gold Coast and doing small spec homes down there. So, I think it really does come down to your work ethic and where your appetite for risk is. Spec homes is very risky, and certainly it depends on what the climate in the marketplace is. Certainly at that time in the early 90s on the Gold Coast, there was definitely a boom happening, and Phil was able to capitalize on that. Now, what I'll tell you also is that Phil believed a lot in high quantity with low profit. He subscribed to that. That's the way he built his business. And, you look at what he's done now. He just finished building a $200 million high-rise on the Gold Coast. You could drive by that. That's really a result of his approach. So I don't know that there's a way that I could recommend that spec homes, this is the best way to build spec homes. I think it comes down to your location, your appetite for risk, your access to finance, your contacts. To give you some more background on Phil, his father was he was a school teacher, a part-time minister, and he had a builder's license. So I'm not sure if any part of that or all of that actually helped Phil get along, but it's certainly in his network he was able to build business relationships with realtors. And I think there was one point where the realtor would supply the land and Phil would actually build. He would basically take care of the cost to build. So maybe using commercial accounts where basically you would sign a personal guarantee, so your neck's on the line there. That was one way that you could probably do that. So look, I don't know that there is a inverted commas best way to build a spec home, but certainly turnkey is something that. And then Phil did get into, and I remember in the early 90s, literally doing projects up one side of the street and back down the other side of the street. And at that time, East Indians and Chinese were definitely who Phil was selling those 4,500 square foot homes to. And we would do everything from, I would do set outs, and then right to the, pool building side of things, landscaping, driveways, fences, turnkey. The thing was ready to move into. So at that stage in the early 90s, that was something that I spent a lot of time doing. Yeah, look, I think you've just got to, and this is what I would say, if you've got a desire to go and do spec homes, then I think you just got to start smallish. I think if you go too big too fast, you're going to blow yourself out. So you really got to understand who you are. You got to have a high level of self-awareness, and certainly, and you know what, to the audience, if I'm talking to, young guys, mid-20s, I'm 49 and I still feel like I'm 25 and probably get accused of acting like a 25-year-old occasionally. You just got to be patient. You cannot, you can only grow at a pace that you'll let yourself grow, and it does take time. So do all you can do and then allow the market come to you. You are the sum total of your experiences, so you've just got to be patient, embrace the wins and the losses, as part of the development process. Okay. Now the next thing that we asked about was, do I get quotes? How do I get quotes or RFQs? I'll probably need to look at that question again, but requests for quotes, getting quotes off of subcontractors and suppliers. You really have to look, I got a quote from an electrician for one of the jobs that I first did when I come to town here, and he was out by 100%. So it's really irritating. So the more detail when you're putting out RFQs or requests for quotes from subcontractors and suppliers, you really have to provide them with the detail at a micro level as to what you're going to require from them. And then you've really got to look at, contingencies and cushions building into your price to ensure that, like with my electrician, he said it'll be $1,400 and then he hands me a bill for $3,300. Can you add 100% on top of the price? No. But you really have to be diligent and have that good network of trades that you can trust. And certainly with lumber suppliers or truss manufacturers, they're always going to say, all care but no responsibility. So ultimately it's up to you to not just put it over there and say, well, you do it, because they'll do it. And if they miss something, you got to pay for it anyway. So I think when the key to having a successful RFQ process is to ensure that you provide the amount of detail. So essentially as a builder, what I would say is you've got to have a black belt in a lot of these trades and understand some of the challenges around what each of the trades are facing, and try and head off those challenges in advance, because there's no point in getting into a project and then bitching because the lumber supplier had forgotten about 500 studs that you're going to need in the basement or whatever. It's all too late. And so the more meticulous and more detailed you are as it relates to your RFQ approach, the better you will be as far as your output is concerned, or the result that you get. I probably will just jump down to no, that was pretty much it. Marking up lumber when subbing everything out. Now, it just depends on, how your setup is. I mean, if you're going to get your best bang for your buck, there would be no way that I would be allowing a carpenter to supply materials. Forget about it. Because you know what? He's going to buy it from Home Depot or Home Hardware or Rona or Lowe's or whatever. He's going to put his markup percentage on it, and then you got to put, so he's going to make money off of that supply. You shouldn't be doing that. So, I wouldn't be. Subbies are going to supply labor. Suppliers will supply, the building supplies and material that you need to build. So, I wouldn't be lazy. As much as you can then deflect some of the risk, if they were to supply it, then they're responsible for shortfalls. But I just think that the markup on that is going to be counterintuitive. So, I wouldn't be letting any suppliers really, other than anywhere you have to. I mean, electricians and plumbers, they supply a little bit of material. But sometimes the plumbers might actually, I did a 5-plex and, I didn't supply one piece of materials for that. So there was definitely the subby, the plumber at that point. Whereas when you go to the electrician, all the light fittings and all the appliances were supplied by me. So, it really comes down to, and I think the whole way through, you've got to be always improving. So you've got to be thinking about what you're doing and then assessing. We just had a home show on the weekend. So Monday morning at 9:15, we start doing a bit of a debrief on the home show and how it went. There's always got to be this plan, do, check, and adjust process. And that hopefully slowly improves the standard. Because you've got to take a shot at it. Let's say it's your first home show, you've got to have a go at it. Then you go there, you do it, you experience it. Then you come back and you debrief, so you check out, what was good and what was challenging. Look at your wins and challenges, and then you modify and you make adjustments and you go around again. And I think, for those that are building a building company and want a business that really does provide them some degree of lifestyle, which you would expect from a business, then that is the same approach. You really want to find out what works for you. If you've got a good arrangement with a framing carpenter, maybe that's going to suit you best. But it's not. I would have trouble sort of believing that as far as lumber is concerned, to be able to sub that out and include that with the labor cost. Hope that answers that questions. Now, one of his next questions was, if I have the plans and permits, can I call up the subs for a quote? That bothers me, or it concerns me, I guess, more so. If you've got plans and permits, you're committed to that project. So how you come up with a what I would say is a forecast, like a feasibility study, where I take into consideration the finance costs, the ins and outs, where I come up with the land costs and then the holding costs for the said land, as well as to be able to, obviously pull down on the finance for the construction of a spec home. I would say that if you're going for quotes now, it's too late. And that means you're vulnerable. So I don't know if I've misunderstood the question, but really you've got to do a lot of the work up front before you go and commit to. Now you'll need some sort of plans to give your subcontractors to be able to do some quoting or some costing, but certainly not permits, because permits means you've got working drawings, which means you're committed to doing this thing. So yeah, I'm not sure if there's a little bit of a cart before the horse there, but in order of appearance, you want to get some prelim drawings or some concept drawings or something that have got measurements on that subs can do quotes for and suppliers can. And then you would move into working drawings once you've really weeded out all of the technicalities within the project, and then submit those to your local city for permitting and approval. So let me know if you've got any, if I've missed the mark there, but that's the way I see it. The other question, we talked about, as we're talking about estimating, is what software. I think I did a podcast about Build Exact. So you can go to buildexact.ca or .com or .com.au, depending on where you're at, and you can sort of check out the software that we use. It's got a graphic takeoff tool, which is pretty handy, especially when you're doing elevations and anything on the floor area. So I think in this day and age, if you're using Word documents to do your proposal letters and you're using Excel spreadsheets to try and do costings, I think that we're beyond that now. Subscriptions are, compared to your revenue, a monthly subscription for a competent piece of software is without question a very valid expense. And so, if you're trying to do it manually, I remember the days before computers, before I was using, takeoff software or whatever, you would have to get half a dozen plans, printed out, and you would have different highlighters and pens and, estimating or costing arrangements where you would say, right, this is the drywall plan, and this is for lumber, and this is for concrete and foundations. So you'd have to have several versions because you would mark that up. And so, I think, and of course then software, I don't know what episode it was, but if you're, wanting to understand better how, we use the software, there's an episode there for that. So, you need to be using that. Okay, getting to some nuts and bolts. He was asking about how to set a profit margin. And look, this is probably the place where if you don't get this part of it right and you don't understand the processes, you're going to screw yourself over, because I asked, and you can go and see these comments. I asked if it was a net or a gross profit, and he said it's a net profit, and is a net profit 20% good enough? Now, if you are making a net profit of 20%, you run an outstanding business. A high performance building company will look to achieve a net profit of between 10 and 15%. So what I find is there's confusion with regards to markup and margin, and there's certainly confusion and terminology around gross profit and net profit. And so this is, again, I think I covered off in maybe a separate podcast. I don't know that I just spoke about markup versus margin, but there was an episode where I talked in depth about markup versus margin. And this is what I would say to encapsulate. Markup is the activity, margin is the result. If you marked up materials by 25% markup, that's your markup percentage. So 25% on materials and labor, your profit margin, your gross profit margin will be 20%. Then out of that gross profit, you've then got to take all your expenses, and one would hope that you've got between 10 and 15% as a net profit margin. If you have less than 10%, you need to change something. You either need to figure out how you're going to make more money, or you got to figure out where you can cut costs to bring down your fixed expenses so that it doesn't eat into your gross profit margin. So that one is going to probably get the audience talking a little bit, just to try and get an understanding. So remember, markup is the activity, profit margin is the result, and those, if you set it up that way. So the other part of the question is, what is an appropriate markup versus margin? Well, I would ask you, what's your fixed expenses? Because guys who are running an organization from their study or their basement or the garage, their overheads, their fixed expenses, so, any off-site staff, all of your utilities, let's say, like at this office, we've got everything to run the office. That's your fixed expenses. We've got 5 full-time staff here. And so those costs, if they're up, then obviously you've either got to have a larger markup percentage, or you've got to do a higher, much more work because you've got quite the monster to feed. So, we subscribe to a 30% profit margin. That's a gross profit margin, which means you're going to have to mark up by 43%. Now, we do a mixture of renovations and custom homes. So the percentage will differ. And, really, so it'll differ based on the size of your business, and it will differ depending on the type of project. So smaller projects, you can have an increased, markup. But on the larger projects, your markup will probably want to decrease. Otherwise, particularly on new homes, you're going to price yourself out of the game. So this is where the balancing act between, the acceptable amount of profit that can be or is built into a job versus what your fixed expenses are. And so, one of my sayings is, we as we building a business, and of course, if you're establishing your second generation, building company, then this should have already been sorted out. But bottom line is, I subscribe to the run a man short. Figure out a way through when you go, gee, I'd love an extra person to be helping us with this, current workload. If you can get through that challenge, then you've just saved yourself, somewhere between 30 and 100 grand, depending on the scope of work that you needed that individual to cover off on. So, again, how to set a profit margin is it's a very individual science. It really depends on your business. I've got guys in the business that have got several employees that have got an office that are running several vehicles, doing several projects versus one-man bands. So for me to do an assessment, it's very different. I can't go to one-man band using the same philosophies that I might go to million-dollar-plus builder. They're really two different approaches. And so there is a lot of things at play. The amount of money that an individual might need as a director or a president or an owner of the building company, he might have the luxury to be able to not pull as much out during the growth phase as what the other guy. I mean, maybe he's living high on the hog and he's spending money on all kinds of bling and shouldn't be, just my opinion. And that's really is a disservice to his business because it's draining his cash at bank. So yeah, markup versus margin, understanding the concept, you need to get that nailed down. You can Google that. I guarantee you there's going to be something there that can explain that to you perhaps better than what I've done. And then how to set a profit margin, or, you've got your profit margin is the result. So you go, okay, what profit margin do I require? And then you've got to make sure that your markup percentage is going to serve that end result competently and accurately. Now, this next question was about raising capital and building houses on a large scale. Look, I think, I don't know anybody's situation. So all I know is that I watched my boss go from, building bridges just before I started right through to building high rises. But that was, really I started with him in 1989, and he probably only finished that high rise probably in the early part of 2020, I think. So, you're talking about a pretty significant amount of time to see. That's almost 30 years. So, I think raising capital and building houses on a large scale is a great goal. But one thing, raising capital, sure, that's one challenge. But I'm telling you that I see guys that start with all of the prowess and all of the posturing as it relates to building a big business, and then the pressure leans on them and they crumble. And so you've really got to, the slower you work up to lifting a heavy weight, your ability to be able to lift that heavy weight is increased, because if you try and lift heavy weight too quickly, it will fall on you and it potentially can destroy you. So, I think it's great to have a bit of an idea in mind, and I definitely don't think there's one plan fits all. Phil was he was a special kind of breed, still is. I mean, he's a very unassuming type of guy. I mean, I remember the time I went back to Oz and I caught up with him on this latest high-rise project, and, he was getting around in high vis and his steel cap boots and driving a forklift and looked like one of the boys, and yet he's done terribly well for himself, and this was his gig. I mean, this was his high-rise, and took me to the 36th floor, and, it was quite the view over the Gold Coast. So, I would say that, Phil's pulled that off because he is definitely an aggressive personality. I remember he used to try and get me on working on weekends and Sundays and stuff. And he's like, Max, you got to think of the money, and I think I was on $50 a day, so I'm like, yeah, that's some pretty serious bank. But, it's, you just got to, you've got to be very self-aware about, who you are as a person. Raising capital and building houses, on a large scale, that's going to have a shit ton of challenges. So you better be educating yourself hardcore and understanding what you're about to get yourself into, because that's not for the faint of heart, I can assure you. How to build houses in new neighborhoods compared to inner cities where they demo and build new homes, tear down and rebuilds. Right. Look, the fiveplex that I built, that was on a I don't know, an 8,500, 9,000 square foot allotment, and that was essentially probably a 40-year-old home that was dilapidated. So it was technically in a flood zone ish. It was susceptible if the Brisbane River rose, that location would flood. So there was a lot of freeboard underneath these townhouses. So it was a bit of a tricky build, and we jammed 5 townhouses into that small lot. So I like the idea of tear down and rebuilds. But, I think when you go into those new neighborhoods, it's littered with, some pretty, serious kinds of brands that are very well set up to deliver at a high level to customers at a very small profit margin. So, I had a builder's license in Australia, and, I come out here, and the reason I got in with Smith & Sons, because I did look at new homes versus doing renos, and still today, right now, the profit margin that is available, because there's a level of risk. Understand this. Why do guys like build new homes? Because it's predictable, for the most part, right? It's not always perfect. But, doing renos, you've got to do a lot of kind of crystal balling to go, okay, where am I going to run into some issues that I can't actually see? So, you've got to be able to have that mentality and that understanding of the build process. Then you've got to be able to sort of go, what cushions and what contingencies and where should I allow those in a reno? And then, what have I got into my contracts that can actually help me if the shit really hits the fan and there's a major oversight that couldn't possibly have been seen? And we've got clauses in the contract to sort of execute off the back of if that happens. So, I know that it's very attractive, or it looks attractive and looks sort of sexy to go and build new homes. But I think that just the fact that renos are more challenging, what it does, and I'll tell you this for real, is that there is definitely your ability to make good profit as well. So it's very binary. If you do it badly, and I often say that, profit is a natural byproduct of good estimating. If you don't understand the build process and you can't construct a quote in a very strategic, organized fashion, you're gonna miss stuff. And so you're going to really negate the ability for you to make money. And the other thing is, if you love doing cost plus, new homes or renos, you do really lose the ability to sell value. A lot of our clients want peace of mind, security, and satisfaction, and they love our fixed price, know what we get and know how long it takes type approach to a building contract. So, I think tear down and rebuilds definitely are good there. If you're talking spec homes, I know that it became popular sort of in and around Queensland to find those inner city locations where there was a dilapidated home where the reno wasn't really an option, but the lot is where the money was at. I mean, I know that, land was selling for what the house and land was worth, but the house essentially was so dilapidated it wasn't worth it. So, look, I don't know if that answers your question or not, but there's definitely opportunity there. But because of its location, you're going to pay top dollar. So you'd want to do your feasibilities to make sure that, what are my ins and out finance costs? What are my holding costs? What's going to my demolition costs? And then what's going to be my rebuild cost? Taking into consideration, you've probably got neighbours in very close proximity. So building those or rebuilding in those locations is a royal pain in the ass, because you've not got very much street frontage, and normally the street's full of cars anyway. So, off-street parking is not an option. Like, there's all these kinds of things where on the outset, it's sort of like wherever you're sitting, the grass looks green on the other side. And, but when you get amongst it, I just don't think that there's any, I know a bunch of Aussies that would love to live in Canada. And I'm like, it's the same thing. Like, it's just, you exist. It's just another community. But it's like we have this romance with something that is outside of our reach or that's on the other side of the fence. And, you could almost say that happens in relationships as well. But it's just, the reality is that you just make life, whatever it is. If you're unable to get a builder's license, then you got to figure out a way how to be a good carpentry contractor or whatever. if you haven't got the ability or the financial capabilities to do new homes, then you've maybe got to settle for small renos and work your way up. We overestimate what we can achieve. And this is young fellas too. They're so freaking impatient. We overestimate what we can achieve in 12 months, but we underestimate what we can achieve in 10 years. If you're 25 right now, and it takes you 10 years to get your shit together, you're 35. Like, I'm 49. It's like you got a whole life ahead of you. You could live your whole life again and still not be as old as me. So it's like you just need to be patient because you can only grow as fast as you let yourself grow. And I think, I love the idea that if you're an ideas guy or gal, then that's great. But you need to face the realistic part of this and accept your limitations. But I would urge you to do well with what's in your hands right now. So if all you can do is bathroom renos, be the best bathroom renovator in your location, because that's going to teach you a lot of stuff. You want to get that so down pat that you appreciate the systems and the processes. You've developed networks in your subcontract community and your vendors, and you're deemed to be a professional. Even though your revenue targets are not very great for the year, they might only be $300,000 a year. What you're doing is you're starting to begin to build the muscle mass over time. So, look, I just think there's opportunity everywhere you look. It really just comes down to the resources at your disposal. The last question that he had here was about constructing flat roofs. Like I said, normally I don't get into construction methodology. He was just talking about drainage systems for water and snow. Look, you can go and Google that shit. I mean, there'll be roofing companies galore who are worth their salt that'll do a blog and talk about what you have to do for drainage on flat roof systems. Obviously, you don't need sagging floor systems or roof trusses, because that'll create dips in the whatever the membrane is on top of that roof, and therefore you're going to have water that sits there. But the drainage processes for those, they're either going to be gutters, they're going to be interior drains, or they're going to be scuppers. One of those three. But of course, none of those work if the fall is not going there. So that's kind of the most important part. Certainly, if you want to jump on TikTok and get into this conversation, knock yourself out. But those they are pretty much the mainstays of roof drainage for flat roofs, as far as I can understand. But certainly I am not the go-to professional for that. Talk to your local roofing companies. Go and take him out for a beer and chew on his ear, as we'd say in Australia, and get the good oil from an actual roofer, reputable roofer in the area. That would be the best way. And look, probably just finishing on that, I think, we are, as builders, we are only as good as the subcontractor network and the supplier network, and even, our in-house employees or team members. And so it's, that's why I think I talked about, profit and people at one stage, and there was something else that was in that podcast. But, I just know that, people make and break your business. And if you're not a very good talent scout and you don't understand the principles around, why we hire quickly, fire quickly, and, that sort of thing, then you're going to find yourself struggling because you can't do it all. I know a lot of guys that get disillusioned with the whole business building process because humans give them, a lot of trouble. Unfortunately, they never have designed a system where they can, mitigate some of that stress from human resource and know how to handle it, and then know how to, recruit and reward and retain good staff members as well. So, look, there's a whole bunch of stuff. Just understand this: the predictable part about building a building company is that nothing is predictable. You literally have to assess things on the fly, follow your intuition, educate yourself as well as you can, and ultimately make a decision. I think if you get caught in the paralysis of analysis, I think we're all afraid to fail. And I'm not saying that failure is enjoyable, but it does make you better and makes you smarter. It doesn't usually kill you. And I think a lot of the building companies that are out there, obviously at Smith & Sons, we have got a business in a box approach. But if you're out there swinging your own sword and trying to make it happen all on your lonesome, then you're going to have to be prepared to take a lot of hits, because that is the transaction. When you get into the business with Smith & Sons, you're going to pay something for admission, pay to play. That's the game. There's a lot of upside after you pay and get involved with Smithies. The flip side is you go out there and swing your sword and do your own thing. There's no upfront payment. The payment that you're going to make is the amount of failure that you're going to go through to actually figure out where and what to do and what not to do. And so there is no easy street. It just doesn't exist. It's life. It's the way it is. And so you've got to reconcile in yourself. Do you want to achieve, something in short term, and you have the financial wherewithal or capacity to be able to buy into something like Smith & Sons, or do you have no choice but to go out there and swing your sword and determine deep down in yourself that you're never going to give up on yourself and you're never going to give up on the process? So, that's where you have to fall in love with the pain of failing forward. And it is a challenging thing, easy to sit here and say, but I've done my fair share of that, and I believe it's a worthy concept. And so, look, on that note, we're going to wrap up today's episode. I hope you got something out of that. You got any questions, hit me up on email, max@businessforbuilders.ca, or of course you can leave some comments below and we will get back to you as promptly as we can. Other than that, have a great day. Go build a kick-ass business. See you on the next episode. Cheers.